This chart shows how the new projection aligns with observed data since year 2000. The gray and black lines are based on measurements from the Key West tide gauge. The blue lines are the IPCC median and the NOAA intermediate high projections. From 2000 to 2013, the trend in the observed data followed about the IPCC median. After 2013, the trend was between the two projections. This comparison validates the use of the projection. Also, since the projection is based on mean sea level, it highlights that water levels will actually be higher, much higher than the projections depending on tides and weather. So you can see these gray lines are actually much higher than the projection is.
So we're at downtown Fort Lauderdale. It's Tuesday, April 28th. High tide is actually coming in. High tide will be here in just a few minutes at 12:30 p.m. And so as you can see, the water is getting closer and closer to the top of the seawall. So right now, if I measure it with my measuring tape, it looks like the top of the seawall is maybe only 2 feet away from the top. So it's April, and the tides are not as high as they could be. In fall, like September, October, November, we actually get what we call king tides. And instead of having 24 inches of clearance, we've got actually only 8 inches, because between the tide of that part of the season plus the higher king tides, you've really got 8 inches between the top of the water and the top of the seawall. And if there's a storm or high winds and more water is moving in to the intercoastal and into this river and being pushed up against the walls, we actually get overtopping over this wall, and you'll get some water into the street. And so that's requiring us to adapt. So we have moved over to where the new seawall is along Riverwalk, where they've already started adaptation to sea level rise. And I just measured to the water level again, and we're actually 20 inches higher above the water than we were at the previous point. And so I wanted to point out, this is one of the oldest landmarks in downtown Fort Lauderdale, the Stranahan House. And so they have had to adapt to sea level rise because they already were experiencing the high tide flooding. And so they've built this new seawall so that the waves don't overtop it. And they've built this deck because the water was actually going through and still flooding the ground. And so they needed to really be up. What's going to happen over time is as new development comes in, they're going to want even more elevation than this property is at. So this is a historic property. It's really hard to lift a historic property. There's rules and codes that restrict that, and maybe it's not a decision that they want to make today. But if you have a new development, they're actually building staircases and elevating the whole property 5 feet above where we're standing on this new seawall. So that's giving them, almost 7 feet of clearance from where today's water levels are. And that is in response and preparation for what future sea level rise will be, which we'll talk about planning for multiple feet over the next 30 years.